The 18th century political philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau sets out in his 1762 treatise The Social Contract to assess two seemingly incompatible forces: man's innate desire for freedom and the authority of the state. The purpose of the social contract, therefore, is reconciling these two opposing forces and structuring them both in such a way where neither are limited and both can be used to their fullest effect. Rousseau spectacularly begins this work with a deadly critique of state authority, writing, "Man was born free, and he is everywhere in chains." Here, Rousseau argues that the natural state of man is freedom, where individuals are supposedly granted by their birthright the ability to do as they please. But at the advent of society and oppressive government, this natural freedom was lost. Instead, it was replaced by civil conventions and laws that impose hierarchy, subordination, and unfreedom upon man, preventing them from accessing what is most fundamental. This is a problem, a deep problem. Rousseau has reconciled that society is necessary to avoid the quarrels that arise within a state of nature. Man therefore cannot regress back to this pre-moral or innocent condition where society is destroyed, especially since he is already accustomed to civil tranquility and order. But this doesn't change the fact: political orthodoxy is wrong. At the time of writing in the 18th century, slavery, right of conquest, and natural authority were the conventional forms of governance that dominated the political landscape. Rousseau saw each of these structures as inherently illegitimate for one reason alone: they suppress freedom. Rousseau wants to establish that society needs something more than an autocratic dictatorship. In this belief, he firmly rejects Hobbes's postulation of an absolute monarch, seeing in essence this style of governance as a form of slavery by agreement. Men cannot submit themselves to a single sovereign authority, because in doing so they renounce freedom, and as Rousseau believes, they renounce one's humanity. Losing their essential character, freedom, and instead receiving civil tranquility is not a fair trade, and while this might seem like, to some, a worthwhile bargain, Rousseau has already considered. There is peace in dungeons, but is that enough to make dungeons desirable? He also reminds us that in absolutism, because man is a slave to the master, what is to stop the master from killing his subject at any point? After all, the king draws his nourishment from the subjects, and everyone knows that kings need more than a little nourishment. Rousseau tells us of a way out that avoids this orthodox tyranny. He proposes a social contract. So let's map out the process of acquiring this contract. First, all men must surrender their natural freedom, which is the unlimited form, but it has to be defended by the self. They surrender this freedom to a universal covenant that prevails over society. Once they have essentially renounced their freedom, in exchange they receive a civil freedom, or right, which is more restrictive, but its main advantage is that it is defended by everyone. Once all persons have made their desires heard to the covenant, the general will comes into effect, becoming the ship that steers this sovereign body towards the common good. All individuals in society are now relying on this will, which acts in the interest of all as opposed to one. Here, the pitfalls of self-interest, or amour de soi, have been transcended, and individuals have arrived at an advanced form of amour propre, where everyone acts in each other's humanity. We all become the sovereign. In answering the central theme of state authority and personal freedom, this binding covenant that every man can enter into will enable us to live at the maximization of both themes. In a paradoxical way, despite man subordinating themselves to an external entity, their freedom, that essential character of humanity, will not be incumbent upon to an undesired extent, and this to Rousseau is the saving grace of his contract. It enables freedom to exist compatibly with authority. Let's look further into the general will. So, it's simple to think of this as the common good in society. that benefits everyone equally without the chance of alienating specific individuals. Each individual in society comprises the general will, so to harm this common good in any way is to technically harm yourself. And this to Rousseau is perhaps the most persuasive aspect of his theory, because if everyone has a significant stake in the common good, no reasonable individual would therefore seek to harm themselves. In trying to uncover what the general will in society is, there are two main solutions. The first is through democracy, where each individual investigates this will through democratic procedures. Here the will is visible to all people, but it requires universal suffrage and high degrees of political knowledge to achieve. The second form it may take is an invisible, omnipresent kind. No one can really see it or accurately define what the will is, but it exists independently of all people, and therefore there is no need to acknowledge it. Individuals will just largely move in the direction of their will by nature, as if some external force is controlling them that is incapable of being perceived. Perhaps the most elusive part of the social contract is trying to best operationalize the general will. Rousseau posits that we need a form of direct democracy, a commonwealth enabling individuals to congregate at frequent assemblies and make collective political decisions. Really, it can be looked through the lens that the only way the people can work out where the general will lies is by entrusting them all themselves with the decision-making process. After all, no one could possibly know your own desires better than yourself. Rousseau does, however, entertain the idea of having an omnipotent legislator or lawmaker to fill the required conditions of the general will. Such an individual would know what is best for the population and easily make the according adjustments. But we can understand that such a task would essentially require a cosmic being, or a god, making this a near impossibility. Therefore, every citizen must be forced into involving themselves in the democratic procedure. Otherwise, if persons were to miss out, then the sovereign is divided, and the sovereign mustn't be divided or chopped up, which also entails no separation of powers, just one conglomerate, a highly centralized entity that each citizen can contribute to. Rousseau received widespread criticism for an essential proposition of a totalitarian democracy, establishing absolute uniformity between the interests of man and the state. It's quite hard in this condition to determine whether humans were better off enjoying more freedom, but having to defend this luxury by their own volition, or sacrificing a bit of their freedom to the general will, but it would be protected by everyone. I guess that this is the question that remains unanswered today. Rousseau also attracted attention from certain revolutionaries who saw his theory as justification for the dismissal of the French kingdom in the 18th century. Very soon after the social contract was written, many of the revolution's key thinkers drew inspiration for regime change from Rousseau and his idea of a government acting in the common good. Rousseau's contract was a bold ambition with incredible societal consequences. This was one of the first true propositions of direct democracy, and is integral in influencing how theorists conceive of the common good, of democratic society, and also reconciling freedom with authority. Rousseau had an inherently optimistic view of human nature and the capacity for social harmony through collaboration. This will forever mark him as one of the preeminent thinkers of the Western canon.